All right, buenas tardes. Oh, no, we did a lot more energy. You just came off of a great panel. Buenas tardes. All right, that sounds really lame. All right, hola.
Hola.
Okay.
Are we doing it in Spanish?
We might have to. I am thrilled to have hopefully what's going to be a provocative, no bullshit conversation about what really is going on with data and really shine a light on the marketer's point of view. And so to my immediate left, we have John Militello, who is the Director of Marketing at Volvo. We have Marta Martinez, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at Intersection, which is an Alphabet company. We have Brad Liebow, who is the Head of All Investment at MediaVest Spark, works with great brands like Sprint and Walmart and all these other great brands. And then Matt Tepper, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Wunderman, which is a really interesting creative plus data CRM shop. And so let's just dive right into it. Let's really talk about you, John, because ultimately it starts and ends with the brand advertiser. And so your background is really fascinating. You actually went to art school. You're from Michigan, lived in the D.
Yeah.
Auto's in your blood. You actually worked at a boutique agency that worked on Volvo.
Yep.
Then you went to this little startup called Google, and you were working at their creative shop called The Zoo.
Yep.
And then you got poached to join Volvo how many years ago?
2 years ago now.
2 years ago at Volvo, and obviously Volvo has done an incredible amount in digital using data. Let's show of hands. Who here owns a Volvo? Anyone? Okay, all new customers right here. Everyone's brand new target audience for you.
Come see me later.
But tell me a little bit about what keeps you up at night from a business perspective. What are you focused on?
So we have a BMT, we call it Blame Marketing meeting every Tuesday. No, it's a business management meeting every Tuesday. And what's interesting for me is the attribution. So about 30% of our sales can be attributed to marketing right now, but yet it's 100% of the topic. So everybody has opinion about marketing. So data is really important for me to kind of fend off those conversations because I can prove things are working, or at least try to prove, or give that illusion. There's still a lot of the gut that actually has to happen. But then also with us is really about getting people into those cars. Because once we know people get into that Volvo car, they see the difference, because you got to think about it. Everybody I run into says, I have a Volvo story. I know my first car was a Volvo. I grew up in a Volvo. And what Volvo did they grow up in? It was a boxy square wagon. And that's nothing of what we are today. So if we're trying to get people to pay a premium for the brand, and that's the vision of the brand, I need to get them to see it. Worse yet, I hear people say to me, the other day somebody came into my house and said, Volvo still makes cars? They're still around, right? And we've doubled our brand awareness in 2 years since I've been there. We've doubled that. But it's still not enough to get out there. So that's what keeps me up at night is, how can I use data to get people into our cars, to think about our users first, but then also how do I use that to prove out to our sales leadership that what we're doing in marketing is working?
And when you think about just the business of automotive, you cannot go into a meeting and talk about impressions or some other BS. That is like hard, cold. Are you moving metal? Are you actually moving cars? And so, how much time? I think you spend some time in Sweden.
Yep. So I'm about to go to Sweden at the end of the month, next month, and I go about every 6 weeks, it seems like, except for their long summer break. They get about 4 weeks off in the middle of summer, which gives me about 8 weeks not having to travel back and forth. But we're there all the time going, really from a marketing standpoint to look at what we're doing globally.
And, for those of you maybe not as familiar with Volvo, Swedish company, about plus or minus 20 billion in sales globally. China's your largest market, US second largest, and then EMEA. And so obviously when you think about the US market, what is, kind of your mix when you think about how you're investing your marketing dollars? What does that mix look like?
So, a lot of our competitors, first of all, we're outspent 5-1 from the mass market brands and 3-1 on the German brands and some of the other luxury brands. And a lot of them spend about 20% of their mix on digital, the rest on traditional TV, and they just bombard TV. What we've done is we've done about 30% digital, the rest television, but within that we're doing a lot of addressable. So if you would count addressable as digital, because it's so targeted, we've got about 50% in digital.
Wow. So, I'd love to bring in Brad Liebow, being the buyer. And, Brad, you ran the Coke buying business for 8 years. You worked on Walmart for 4 years. You've kind of seen it all. There's a lot of crap out there. And everyone says, hey, we've got this shiny object, we got this widget. But at the end of the day, where the rubber meets the road is, can you actually buy it? And how are you actually making sure that you have your client's best interest in mind? When you hear about all this stuff about data, is it just still lots of hype? Can you actually buy this way, even in things like addressable TV?
The answer is yes, but I think that gives you guys the simple. Of course, you can go buy this way, but the challenges in the marketplace are twofold. One, there's a lot of suppliers out there that are looking to sell different types of products. It's very hard to sift through those products. There's also challenges with overselling some of those products, saying, hey, we can deliver this, and then when you get in the market and you try to go deliver against it, you really find out that it's not delivering the expectations that you want it to. But really, using data for one-to-one direct response type targeting, like we're talking about even specifically in addressable, is only one part of the entire portfolio and the mix that you're going to go invest in the marketplace with. There are, tons of other options between offline media from out of home, local media. Think about all of the stores and the dealerships that you're looking to drive people into. So while data is important, again, we all know it's hard to sift through it. There's a lot of it out there. What's the right stuff should we be using? Where should we be using it? And how do we apply it for learnings afterwards? The biggest challenge for me is, like I said, sifting through all of that and trying to understand what are the right products that are going to drive our business.
So, you mentioned out of home very timely because Marta, Intersection is probably one of the coolest companies. How many people have seen that link NYC all around the city? Raise your hands. Okay, that's Marta. Not that she's physically installing them all, but
I'm learning so much about what it takes to install those.
But Marta, you've had a phenomenal career working on the ad tech side and the media side. Before being at Intersection, you were at AOL, and so you worked for a lot of brands. You are actually sitting on top of a ton of really interesting data, but it hasn't been packaged, it's not commoditized. And so when you think about how do you actually bring that to market to someone like John, what are the challenges that you've had? Because obviously it's differentiated, bespoke data.
Yes, so what's very interesting is if you think about all of the data conversations we've been having over the last even 20 years, they have been based on digital behaviors. What are consumers doing on their phone, on their, on the desktop? And the truth is, 90% of the transactions in the United States still happen in brick and mortar stores. Obviously, e-commerce is driving, and we invented this term in our early interactive advertising days of driving traffic to a specific web location, when there is a lot to do to drive physical traffic into different locations. So what we are doing is we're using obviously mobile data and what a mobile tells you about a specific consumer to connect the digital life to the physical locations. And so we're doing a lot of work on how do we drive, we know that we have one of these links, my kids call them R2D2s in the streets of New York. How do we drive how do we have people that are walking around New York change the destination that they're going so that they can stop and finally test drive the car that they've been wishing to test drive and sit in those phenomenal leather seats. We're going to talk about the leather seats. Note for everybody who is in market for a car, the leather seats in the Volvo are second only to the Rolls Royce.
Exactly.
All right, so I learned that during the process. Amazing. And so my parents do own a Volvo.
Oh, good. Now we're going to get you to own a Volvo.
That's right, we're working on it. But I think we're doing a lot of work on how do we drive physical traffic? How do we get people into a Starbucks when it's really hot or really cold? How do we get them into all of the different retail locations where those 90% of transactions happen? And how do we connect those pieces? So there's been a lot. You see tremendous amount of data, and we're going so deep in digital. I think it's time we start to go a little bit broader, and we connect all of the different realities so that we can help you drive traffic into traffic into dealers in your case. And then once we have them there, it is your job to convince them to.
Well, it's actually, it's a sales job, so that's where the rubber meets the road for us.
Correct.
It is really hard is we don't even have an accurate count of our showroom traffic that's real. And what I'm trying to do is move away from just the KPI of driving web traffic to driving in-store traffic. Because at the end of the day, we can show that the likability of our TV spot is amazing, that it's driving to our website, high-value tasks, but in those meetings they're like, but it's not selling cars. And that's a part that I don't necessarily control, but if I can kind of take ownership of that by using other technology and data to drive people to the actual dealership, now if I'm already on the hook for it, I can help. And then the second part of that is making sure the sales team educates our sellers to sell that car. And that's the user experience part, that kind of like the real human-to-human user experience.
So, Matt, you have an interesting vantage point because you used to work at RGA and you actually worked on Volvo for a bit. And then you're now at Wunderman, and they have this really interesting matchup between creative and data. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Is there a diminishing turn to all this data? Because, certainly the creative, we used to say data at programmatic scale is still, if it's crap data, it's going to be crap just at scale, right? So how do you kind of view it from your vantage point?
Yeah, I think I think one of the biggest issues we're facing as an industry, and it's evidenced even by our conversation, is for some reason we haven't yet made the pivot to brands owning their audiences. Brands are leasing their audiences from all these different point solutions, so it gets really expensive to re-buy the same audience in different channels in different ways. So I think there's going to be this big shift in the industry to start thinking about how we start bringing these audiences together and attributing that data to those audiences.
Basically, brands building their own customer graph, right?
Correct. Yeah. So like a people-based marketing. Yeah. When you talk about addressable, that's what's really going to power that stuff. Is to say we need some source of identity truth, and then we need to start building around that point of truth with all the different data points. So then we can tie in geolocation services and say, oh, I understand that I touched this person here, and I gathered this data about them. And then later, offline, we saw them go to a dealership.
So, one of the biggest industry kind of shifts that I've seen, being in the business, is the shift from media planning and buying to audience planning and audience buying. And when you really take a step back, all the audience buying, it's just, that's the programmatic stuff. That's just using technology to buy an impression. That is actually not that interesting. That is truly commoditized at this point. Where the value actually happens is in all the audience planning. And I think that's where, John, you need to figure out who is selling you a widget, because you don't have time for a widget. But, you actually have been talking about fewer, bigger, better. Just talk to, what advice would you give to folks that are trying to actually sell into Volvo?
Well, I mean, on a certain level, we changed and shifted our strategy, even on TV, and did, smaller, bigger, better, and hitting our right audience to get the right frequency and the right reach for who we're trying to find our tribe. And what I need is partners who are going to come to me, because, man, we were just talking about before, coming from the other side, the agency side and the platform side, where you're calling on all these people, then now on the brand side, there's a lot of empathy, I think, that on that side, I wish I even had more of, because it's just with the march of meetings and the cadence of that, and all the people coming to me with, hey, buy this, buy this, buy this, buy this, buy this.
Hey, I got some data.
Yeah. Well, that's what it's like. So what I'd like to do is be able to have somebody understand some of my problems or ask me, and then come back to me with a solution and get my attention that way, rather than kind of wasting my time and just knocking at the door and keep sending me stuff that I don't need. I mean, it's hard to do, but I think if you get past the like, hey, we're this company, you're like this, we share brand values, like, who cares? Like, what I really want is, like, I know this is your problem, and you guys are ripe to do this, and here's how I can help solve your problem.
Right.
And so many, if I could even jump in too, because so many people that I see in the marketplace that come, to share solutions with us are generally selling products that their organization has asked them to sell, and not necessarily customizing it, because that's perfectly fine, or creating a specific solution for the brand. So understanding the brand's needs, challenges, and then finding solutions will drive exponential revenue for you guys, way more than just, hey, I have this solution that we created, I'm going to try to fit a square peg in a round hole and see if maybe somebody likes it.
But let me build on that and see what you guys think of this. So I have this theory that over the last 10 years, we've trained brands to be good data consumers. So buying data, figuring out how to use data. But if you think about the way the economics are structured in the industry, the data is designed to be commercial, which means it's designed to be as applicable, widely applicable as possible to as many brands as possible. So the flip side of that is none of that data is specific to a brand or those consumers' problems. So I think an interesting place for us to start playing is how to shift brands from being data consumers to being data creators. And what I mean by that is when we do content, what you're doing is you're allowing people to self-identify as being part of an audience. Using the ad tech stack, we can capture those people, we can scale them through lookalike modeling, and then all of a sudden that's an owned audience that we created around a specific data set that's paramount to the brand and the consumer that the brand's trying to reach.
Yeah, and I think even building on that too, brands, a lot of the brands, all of our brands have first-party data, and it's about how you're able to leverage that, because we have a number of clients where, that we represent that certainly want to own that whole process. And they want to own all of that data themselves versus passing it through to other organizations, having it then change hands, a few different times. So the solutions that we're looking to bring to marketers, brands, et cetera, have to provide the infrastructure for that brand to be able to leverage and utilize that data on their own, very similar to what you're talking about.
Right. And I think, you're going to see this incredible shift to every single brand saying, I don't want to put a vendor at the center. I actually want to put my customer at the center. Let me build my own customer graph. And that's where I think having, platforms like PubMatic to really kind of power the ecosystem. This way, you don't have to worry about it. It's just going to work, right? And so PubMatic really becomes the way to be that connective tissue to kind of connect a lot of these things. But then how are you building on top of it? And that's where, back to you, when you think about you building your customer graph, one of the challenges is you have to have the lens of your business. Like, who here really understands auto? Who is coming and saying, hey, I even understand the tier 1, 2, 3, industry structure, right? I mean, when people come talk to you, before talking about data or trying to sell you something, do they even understand the business that you're in?
Well, some do, but it's kind of a catch-22 because the ones that do are kind of old school, who've done this before in automotive, and the ones who have the actual technology and the data I actually need don't understand the business and how it all works, how we work with our dealer groups, how we work with dealers. And what I'm looking to do to connect tier 1 through tier 3 seamlessly, right? Because what I need to do is merge all, if I'm being outspent that much, how do I coordinate that money, get my tier 2 dealers to be on board with doing the same thing I'm doing, whether it's on TV or digital? Yeah. And then on tier 3, how can I make it super easy for them to just run stuff that's tagged and I can pass that along?
That's right.
Right, so then all of a sudden I've orchestrated my media on those 3 tiers and people understand that. It's really rare to get people to understand that, what's going on in the automotive business and the change that we are able to make as a small brand, a niche player.
So this goes from Moneyball to basically Data Ball, right? Where you're trying to actually outsmart the competition.
Or
Yes.
people. Because I don't think it's necessarily the data, I think it's the people.
Yep.
Like, what would a media plan look like that's not, because at the crux of all this is a media
You mean
plan,
an audience
right?
plan?
Exactly, right? So what would an audience plan as opposed to a media plan look like? I don't think we'd ever get there because it's just about addressability with the audience. But I would love to see media plans start having channels at the top and then audiences at the bottom and how much we're allocating at the audience level. And then that way we can organize all of the third-party partnerships around audiences.
And the content that goes around that as well, because you definitely need different content to execute in each different area.
Do you guys know of anybody who's doing media plans like that?
No, you go.
I mean, it's, the challenges we also have sometimes is getting through some clients' infrastructure. They are still, like I have many clients that are still all about television. I need X amount of TRPs because this is what my model tells you have to do. However, for a particular client that we've been working with, we have basically figured out, using their first-party data, using all of the data that we have in terms of third-party data, collectively, and figured out how to start to audience plan in some of those perspectives. And by doing that, we're then able to allocate channels smarter. It doesn't get us all the way there, but you're able to allocate channels smarter. You're able to allocate the content that you're placing in that channels in a smarter way, which then gets us another step closer to thinking about the right audiences. It's all about, the way we think about things is kind of conversion media, right place, right moment, right time, right message, and how do you start to deliver that all together?
Is it the media mix model? Do we need an audience?
Yeah,
Mixed model.
Mix model?
But let me bring, Marta into this. So one, you guys are at the risk of being a little bit too agreeable for my taste. So, Marta, you are working on some really innovative stuff, but, maybe the agency can't keep up with it, right? So how do you actually break through? Because I'm sure there's lots of folks maybe in the room that say, hey, we have something that is going to be relevant to the business. We actually have something very unique. what are the struggles that you have when you want to actually give this insight
Yeah.
or this value proposition to a brand?
Yeah, and we're actually having a little bit of this conversation before, because I'll tell you, I started my career in the media agency side, and I was one of the first, very strong proponents of programmatic advertising, started one of the first trading desks, and then I went to the dark side. When I went to the dark side, where we all now live, I understood that there was zero knowledge of marketers and what marketing really meant and how you drive product off the shelf or, whatever it is that each marketer, how you sell cars, right? And so over the years, and we are doing, there is a playbook, and we are doing the playbook right now, again, at Intersection, I continue to see how thinking like a CMO and putting the sellers, and I do sellers on quotes because I don't like to think about sellers, I like to think about as brand partners, putting them in that situation where they can help them understand what they can bring to that equation is a really difficult thing to do. Because everybody we hire in our teams has this tendency of like, I'm just gonna go sell my widget, my really cool technology. And so I right now have a really cool technology, and I have to hold the teams back from selling the really cool technology and understanding how does the data, the location, and everything that the platform that we are creating in cities in the US and in the UK, how does that help move brands? And it's a very different, like I will tell you, it is really tough to work through all of the agency,
Spider web.
And creative happens here and media happens here. Now we have the trading desk, and I grew up there, so it's almost like going back home for
And then
me.
politics
And
in the
yet
middle
it's
of
like,
it
so you will see, and you guys see it, a tendency for brands to, or for I think the innovators that understand and that have a product that makes sense to go direct to the
That's what you guys,
right?
yeah, did, and I think, I sometimes drive my agency crazy.
Only sometimes.
Sometimes.
Only sometimes.
Both creative in the digital and in the media side, because, on one end, I'm going, the vision is I'm trying to connect the pipes so we can have this programmatic, audience-focused thing to work. But first, we got to connect all the pipes. And so the media agency is going, great, you guys are connecting the pipes, you're championing that. The creative agency is going, there's no creativity here, right? What is it? It's just about a CTA and a headline and changing a couple of photos. And I'm like, no, we're building an infrastructure. And then I'm saying, this is the vision of what I see it connecting in a multi-dimensional way to consumers. And then the media agency is going, but we can't do that yet. How is that ever going to happen? And what I'm trying to do is I think there's going to be a time when we're able to kind of connect the audience. So the only way to really get to the audience, and we're trying to do it on Addressable by having 4 segments of 4 different audiences and putting 4 different messages up there. So we're kind of there, like in baby steps, right? Yeah. It's really nascent. But with programmatic and dynamic, how can we not just get the right CTA and the right action, but that right value? Like what's surprising to like, what value am I bringing to them? Why should they consider me? Why should they choose my brand? And how do I connect with them? How do I make this brand, that creative storytelling that we're doing on all these different levels, kind of respect the intelligence of our users and our customers and get them to buy into our brand? Because I only need a little bit. I'm not looking to conquer the entire world, but what I'm trying to do is grow our brand. Even if I double it, we're still a pretty small brand. But we're going to get more people into that brand by really connecting to them on a level that they feel
That's
like
meaningful to them.
That
yeah,
matters
that we're
to them.
designed around that. We understand them, we make them feel special, and we protect what's important to them. How do we get that message across? And we're then now branching off into other connected services, mobility, car sharing, apps, and really focused on that. We just opened an office in Mountain View, and then we're building a factory in the US to build cars here. So we're really trying to kind of be more than a car company. We're really trying to be a brand that connects, because at the end of the day, the parity of all these cars, the value of a Mercedes versus a Hyundai in terms of how they're built isn't that different anymore. So in order for you to sell a car or a luxury item at a premium, when they're all built fairly similar, you have to then show what value, what am I giving, what value add am I giving to the customer?
Yeah, I mean, I think having worked both in media and creative agencies, I have a somewhat strong point of view about this. So you guys, let me know what you think of that. I think we, as an industry, we need to do a much better job of recognizing that there's 2 broad data sets, and we're trying to put them together. One is the vast majority of our data, which I would call data for decision making. So it's attribution data, it's targeting and prioritization data, The other side is data for motivation, which is where insights come from, which drives great creative. They're not the same data set. We keep trying to take this targeting prioritization data and shoehorning it into creative briefs, but it's flat data. It's a single data point, and it doesn't work. There's no tension there for a creative team to develop powerful creative off of. So I think what we need to do is first recognize that these are two different data sets. We need to think about where we're going to gather data for the two different data sets. And then, frankly, my perspective is I think we need to run the machine backwards. I think we need to solve first for the harder one, which is how are we going to motivate people? What's going to resonate with them, be meaningful to them? Because this part, the data for prioritization is much more developed. So if we can solve for this and then back into the targeting and prioritization, I think we'll actually be able to solve the finding people and then having something meaningful to say to them.
And that was the crux of the issue at Google. When I worked at the zoo, we were a creative team, and we were looking at data through the lens of exactly that. Like, what insights can we pull out to understand the consumer better, to come up with a better creative idea, a better way in?
Right.
What's that way, and what's the message? How do we do that? Where the other sales teams were looking about, here's the data, here's how we connect
Yeah,
the
how
people.
you find them.
And there's a fundamental, like, almost like that nobody even really acknowledges that until you actually, like, really
Right.
said that. You know, I don't think people really understand those two different positions of data and how to use the data that way.
Well, there's how do you use data for differentiation, for brand differentiation, which you desperately need in a very crowded space. And then how do you use data to scale, for scale efficiencies? And those two are almost opposite. Right? You know, I think you were talking about deterministic, you know, like there's all of these different types of data. Here we're normalizing and we're putting data in as many boxes that are all equal as we can because we want to do it at scale. Here we're finding nuggets that are only valuable for one brand, and if another brand finds them, they're not valuable
Right.
to them. They're only valuable to
So
them,
that
and that's
was-
where they can.
You know, so it's
you know.
bespoke to the brand, but you're hitting on the elephant in the room, which is truly understanding identity,
That's
right?
right.
And so, you know, Neustar's been doing identity for 20 years. We connect people, places, and things with trusted identity. And we started, you know, in a telecom industry. You know, we run caller ID in North America. We run 10% of global internet traffic. We do security. And now we're bringing that trusted identity to marketing. And it's interesting that you have, you know, billions of cookies, but there's only 220 million adults in the US. So that disconnect, what you just said, is going to be really the space to be in. It's not about, you know, data elements. Data does not equal identity. It's going to be how do you actually connect? How do you connect, you know, kind of the motivation data with, you know, kind of the media-related data? And this is kind of what Mark Pritchard is back, and, you know, maybe it's a nice way to wrap up the panel. You know, Mark Pritchard from Procter is on this tear. He's doing like, you know, like the triple crown or something, going to every single major conference to kind of give his speech that, hey, we've been distracted by the shiny objects. You know, we've actually forgotten that 93% of our sales happen offline. You know, we need to get back to growth. How do you kind of think about, you know, really bringing it back to what do you guys focus on? Because to your earlier point, only 30+% is really going to be attributed to marketing. What kind of advice would you give to the room to really think about how to bring it back to business growth, not just about media marketing?
Yeah, so I think what you need to do is kind of take all that out and really think about what drives your brand and understand and use that data and insight. What drives those consumers? We talked about finding our tribe and then building those audiences and look like. So what motivates those people? How do our communications touch those people in a meaningful way? You know, we're out there and you look at even TV landscape, everybody, there's no differentiation between a luxury car ad and a mass market car. They're all just shouting about themselves. And we've been taking the approach about couching ourselves in their lives, because if you're at a party, our ECD Matt O'Rourke talks about this at Gray all the time. If you're at a party and you just met somebody and they come up to you and they say, hey, here's everything about me, you're going to walk away from that person. So you need to get to know them, right? So we're trying to then do that, because and really understand the core of our DNA, who our brand is, what it means to people, and put it out there in a meaningful way, and then find those channels to find the right people at the right time in a smart way to get them into the brand.
But that's why you need to have a customer graph. Again, to your point
That's what
about
we're trying to
bespoke
build right
data.
now, yeah.
And I think the sweet spot, what you're going to start seeing in 2017 is second-party data partnerships.
Yes.
You're going to have Volvo, and, you know, we provide this for a lot of brands, a secure data locker in the cloud where you can actually have Volvo first-party data, and maybe you partner with Intersection. Maybe you partner with ESPN. Maybe you partner with, you know, a non-competitive brand like McDonald's. Like maybe there are insights there that people that love French fries from McDonald's and people love Volvo.
Yeah.
There are lots of creative insights there.
It's funny that you say that. We're talking to one mobile location company that allows us to look at our competitors. And what they found with one of our major competitors, they could see dealership traffic, people walking, driving, whatever, to the dealership. And then where they go next is Barney's, and then they go to Chick-fil-A. So what kind of insights can that gather, right? Can I build lookalikes to try to conquest? Because I know my loyalty, but I've also got to grow this brand.
Or co-op dollars.
Yes.
Volvo and
Correct.
Chick-fil-A
Right.
go into market together.
Well, do I use use their second-party data in a smart way to draw those people in?
That's right. So, I'd love to open up for maybe one or two questions from the audience. Are there any questions for John or any of the other panelists? Gentleman in the back. Do you want to stand up and say your name and where you're from?
Yeah, I'm live, so I don't need a mic. I'm Jake Leguski from Vice. Most curious about how are you convincing the end-to-average brand to use first-party data in partnership with publishers, right? So everyone knows that their data, believes that the brand's data is the most accurate and trusted by the brand. How do you bring that partnership together? Because going out on calls, Vice has been very active in providing a data solution in addition to the media or in partnership with it. But we're seeing a lot of brands not understanding the actual opportunity around the data that they have, we have, and then other third parties. So any ideas and what you guys have seen in the marketplace around how do you get those two to partner together and work best?
Yeah, I think Vice is it's a softball, so I appreciate it. No, because, nice.
Hard-hitting follow-up.
Because what's interesting about Vice is what you're doing with your content is there's two ways to sell the data that you're creating. One way is the traditional way, which is to sell it as a publisher in terms of inventory. The other way, which I think is where things are going to go, is you start thinking about how to package your content in such a way that you're defining audiences that aren't available anywhere else. So not to get overly dorky about it too quickly, but it has to do with the metadata layer. So we all have to rethink how we're categorizing our content to create new audiences that may actually not just be about this article and this article, but if we think creatively about how these two articles appeal to the same person and we define that person as something relevant, you can just tag them the same and then you can sell that or partner with a brand around that audience. And I would even push it further to say that what would be amazing is for publishers and brands to start coming together to think about what audience Volvo should be creating and actually make that a brief to Vice to say, these are the types of people we want to find and engage and identify, build some content that is going to attract them, drop a cookie on them, build some lookalikes, and all of a sudden you have a custom audience that's built for a specific Volvo need.
Yeah, if I can also add too, just, it's really challenging to get first-party data out of marketers and brands. And I'll let you, obviously, you are going to know this a lot better than I do, but, until you're able to prove to them that the value of releasing that data and what that data is going to deliver for them when they provide it to you, and the measurement and, is it going to sell more cars? What is that going to do? What's the reason for that? Because what I've found is in the very few brands that I've seen that have released first-party data through either agencies or through other places, there's a lot of the legal restrictions, there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of fear about, oh my God, this is about to get out there. So it's not like they're going to do it for everybody, and I think it's incumbent on the folks who want that, who want to use it, because it's going to help the brand, it's going to help sell more product, to really prove out first why that's going to help that particular brand as well.
Great.
Yeah, from a brand side, for me, it is tricky. So we have to be really careful and cautious. I think there's some stuff that even recently came out about how people are using their first-party data that users can get really up in arms about, and we need to be really careful about that. But for me, when we were talking to some of our partners, if I can see the power we have of merging that data, and also offsetting my media cost, quite frankly, if I'm trying to punch above my weight, and my media has to be more effective, more efficient, and I'm getting less media dollars, how can then they use that monetary piece of that to offset and spend more in media? So all of a sudden now it becomes very attractive to a niche small brand that's trying to punch above their weight.
And that's why I think it's so important to own your audience, right, as opposed to leasing it every time.
Marta, I'll let you have the last word.
I would say, and it's interesting because where I see now, we have tremendous amount of data of all of the New Yorkers that, walk around the city every day. Data has to be always like a two-way street. And there is something about how challenging it is to do that, putting still the consumer at the center and having the brand own how they use the data for value. If I was to make a prediction, I think that we're going to see our pricing models for data and for content change quite dramatically. And this thing where you have right now, you have like your data cost and all of these different, all of these bites into that margin. That will have to change very dramatically, and maybe it is. I know in the industry we've been pushing over and over to be able to prove that we are actually or sell to you in a way in which we could just do it when you sell a car, and it might be that this is one of the areas where we can start to dent into that. If we create the machines, and this is a whole industry effort with the infrastructure, the platforms, the data providers, we can figure out how we help them pay for the data and for everything that they do that helps them sell one more car every week or every day or every
hour.
in every hour, I'm going now in every DMA, then I think all of that it's all about back to value, all about back to value.
So if I were to summarize, it sounds like data is definitely done, but it's data as we define and know it today. I think we need to evolve the conversation to actually focus back on what matters. It's about business growth. It's about brands moving from being a cost center, and you're spending all this money, but you're not actually getting an asset on the balance sheet. It's actually moving to being a profit center. And by brands building their own customer graph, you now have an asset that you're building on.
And I would just add to that, we're storytellers. We have to tell our story of our brand. So how does this data allow us to tell our story?
Yeah.
Because the content is king, actually, and the content, our brand story, our stories about our product, our
Those
heritage,
leather seats.
those leather seats that are as good as Rolls Royce or second to none. Those stories need to get out there, and the data is just a way for us to get out there. And I want to be able to tell those stories and interact with my consumer in a way that's meaningful to them, that surprises them, that gets them to want to buy my brand.
Well, I think you accomplished the mission of this panel. You got everyone to hear that story, and hopefully you have a whole bunch of new Volvo clients. So thank you very much to the panel.